problems that anybody faces in the essay exam is key. There is no defined syllabus. There is nothing to guide you. There is, no absolute कि ये पढ़ना है. For instance, GS1 में history है, GS2 में polity है. Like all of those papers have some syllabus at least. It's still not completely defined, but essay has no syllabus at all. Essay में what is needed is good writing, and good writing is not, आप एक जगह से नहीं सीखते हो. It's a combination of a lot of things. If you're a regular reader, if you like reading, then obviously you have a greater advantage in writing an essay. Why? Because you're used to writing in a particular manner. You're used to doing things in a way. And this is the idea of the essay, that if you can read some non-fiction books, let's say if you can read essays by, क्या नाम था उनका? Just a second, let me just check the name. So CPR के head हुआ करते थे ये, Center for Policy Research, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, right? So Pratap Bhanu Mehta is a great writer. Shashi Tharoor is a great writer, and the essays that these guys are writing are also relevant for you in other subjects of general studies. Why? Pratap Bhanu Mehta will write about constitutionalism, right? And Shashi Tharoor will write about a lot of social issues. So these are all argumentative Indian by Amartya Sen, right? So these are great books. These are not directly syllabus, but these will help you develop an understanding about what is good writing. What does good writing look like? For instance, last session we did an assignment which talked about reading the answer scripts of people who have done well before, reading the answer scripts of Anudeep Durishetty to be in particular. So for essay, you can read some of these books. Good writing by Shashi Tharoor, by Amartya Sen, by Pratap Bhanu Mehta, and all of these people, so that you at least get an idea about kya cheez hai that makes for a good essay. What is good writing like? Because once you have an idea about what good writing looks like, then you can obviously try and replicate that in your own writing, right? So with that idea, let's begin today's session. Just a second. Right. So the first thing that you need to be aware of while you're doing the essay is choosing your topic. You have to be very, very careful about the topic that you choose. Sometimes people have this understanding that people choose topics for multiple reasons. What you need to choose your topic is based on this, that what is the topic that you know best. Everybody will have different topics that they know best. Somebody will be more comfortable talking about women's issues. Somebody will be more comfortable talking about technology. Somebody will be more comfortable talking about maybe caste, right? It all depends on what optional you have, what is your area of interest, and all of those things. So never choose an essay with the understanding that, everybody is writing on this, so I should not choose this. I should choose something else. That is not the way to stand out. Why? Because if you choose a topic where you do not have enough information, you will write a substandard essay, and that way you'll lose marks. So when you need to choose your topics, because in essay, if you know the format of the paper, you have 4 plus 4, right? You get 4 social issues and 4 thematic or philosophical essays, and you have to choose one from each. So choose the topic that you know best. In the philosophical essay, that means the topic that you think you understand the best, that you have the most examples for. Why? Because in the philosophical essay, for instance, you'll get topics like humanity is journey from being human to human being to being humane, right? So that's the topic of the essay. If you're not clear about what is the topic of the essay, what are the keywords here, what is being asked of you, leave that essay. The idea is you should write the essay that you enjoy writing about, or you think you will enjoy thinking about, because you need to have some examples in your essay. When you're writing 1,000 to 1,200 word long form answer, GS में क्या होता है? GS में you have 150 to 250 words का space, right? So you don't have a lot of space to go into detail. You don't have a lot of space to give examples. You don't have a lot of space to tell stories. But in essay, this is exactly what you get. that you can give examples, that you can prove a point, that you can set up your arguments, and you can take sides. So this is one of the things that you need to keep in mind while writing an essay, that you can take sides. Now, this side should not be something very extreme. Let's say, for instance, Aadhaar is an example that I mentioned in the last session as well. So Aadhaar has issues. You can take side with data that, this is an issue that needs to be resolved. Hence, Aadhaar might need to be reformed, does need to be changed. But if you take an extreme stand that Aadhaar is the worst scheme ever, it needs to be scrapped. Or for instance, there's an essay that you're writing on capitalism. So if you're writing about capitalism, having Marx as a perspective is great. But if you say that, capitalism is the worst form of government, worst form of economic, organization ever, so that will not be the best thing ever. There should not be extreme stances in your essays, but you can still take sides. So just a second. I think there are some more people. So you can take sides. So what you need to remember is that you will have to justify your choice. That whatever side you take, you should have data to back it up. We'll consider this more when we do the exercise in today's session. So I do hope that all of you have kept A4 sheet with you so that we'll be able to do that. Now let's just break down what the essay is all about. So intro, body, conclusion is obviously very, very basic. Now intro is a little different from the GS answers. Why? Because in the GS answers, it is preferable if you just take one topic or take one keyword from the question and you explain it, because that just tells in 150 words ka space, you have very limited space. In that space, if you take one keyword from the question and just explain it, that tells the examiner that you've understood the core demand of the question. But essay is not that. In the essay, if you can start from a story, it's a great thing. The story could be something real that the story could be based on a news report that you had read. The story could be completely made up. For instance, this is one of the very basic things that you need to get used to with an essay is the art of storytelling. Because essay, consider it from this perspective that once you get into service, your job as a senior bureaucrat, because this is what this exam is trying to select, right? Whatever post you get out of this exam, you'll be a senior bureaucrat, meaning you'll be at the senior management levels, starting at least from the mid management levels of huge organizations. You do not have to do the grunt work, as in कि मतलब आपको जाके ground पे इतना काम नहीं करना है, but you need to be able to communicate very effectively, and the essay is a test of that, how effectively you can communicate. So just a second, I think more and more people are joining. I'll change that setting. Yeah. So if you can start with the story, if you can start with some facts, but don't overly concentrate on facts. This is a great thing if you do it in GS. But you can also start with that in essay, but your fact should be something that catches attention. The idea of the introduction in the essay is to catch the reader's attention. तो जैसे कि आपने कोई भी अच्छी सीरीज होती है या whatever, like for instance, I'm sure all of you have seen Game of Thrones, right? So if you've seen Game of Thrones, so one of the first things that happens in that series is you enter the series and there's murder, right? Grabbed your attention. Like you don't know who the characters are, you don't know what's going on, you're just like, there's a murder, what's going on? So that's something that you need to do with your essay as well. You need to catch the examiner's attention. How you can do that is through stories. It's through, let's say, uncommon facts. For instance, if there's an essay on women's rights or the modern Indian women or woman or something of that sort, what you can start with is a very, very simple fact that women represent 48% of India's population. Not 50%, 48%. Why? Because we know that India's sex ratio is around 919. So that translates to about 48%. But when you 919 ko 48% जब आप लिखते हो, so it's something different. क्योंकि जनरली द अंडरस्टैंडिंग इज कि नहीं 50% के आसपास होना चाहिए, कुछ होना चाहिए, बट 48% व्हेन यू से देयर इज अ ग्लेयरिंग गैप, then you can mention that these 4% of 125 crores, that is a huge number, right? So you can say these 6 crore women are missing. Where are they? If you start an essay like that, you started with the fact, but you caught the examiner's attention. Why? Because it's a different fact. You're trying to get into a story. Similarly, you can start with anecdotes. So the end goal with the introduction in an essay is to catch the examiner's attention, and it should be limited to 2 to 3 paras. It should not be कि आपने 3 पेज की introduction की लिख दी है, right? So intro 1 to 2 page, maybe. Then we come to the meat of the essay, the body. The body in the essay, for instance, we talked about this in the GS part as well, that you will have some context setting. What is the idea about? कि अगर हम लेते हैं, let's say for instance 2020 का जो पेपर था CSE, so it had a question which, just a second. So the question topic was simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Right? So introduction may, obviously, if you can tell a story about how in a real life example or how in communication आपने ये देखा है कि by being very very simple and very very straightforward and clear, right? For example, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. What you can use is Nike ka the motto. What is it? Just do it. Right? Just do it. Very simple, very clear. It's also asking you to buy Nike. It's also asking you to do whatever the hell it is you want to do. It is the most sophisticated thing. You can also take example from Amazon, right? Amazon का logo आप सबने देखा है. And there's an arrow that goes from here to here, right? Very simple logo, but it's also telling you a message. It's a smile, right? If you look at it closely, it looks like a smile. And it's telling you that you can get from A to Z on Amazon. Simplicity, ultimate sophistication. By being so simple, they're telling you so much about their ideas and their understanding of the world. So this is, let's say, how you start this essay. And then you have to break down this idea. What do you mean by simplicity? What do you mean by sophistication? And how you're going to be connecting the two. So this part over here, yeah. So this part over here, breaking down the idea, this is very, very important in an essay. Why? Because it sets the tone. It sets the tone of what you want to talk about in this essay. जीएस के आंसर्स में आपके पास इतना स्पेस नहीं है कि आप एग्जामिनर को ये भी समझाओ कि मुझे किस बारे में बात करनी है, दैट व्हाट इज द टॉपिक दैट यू वांट टू टॉक अबाउट. बट इन द एसे, फॉर इंस्टेंस, sorry about the drill that you may be hearing, but not something that I can do about. So in the essay, one of the core things that you need to understand is you will have to define what you want to talk about. Even in this essay, let's say simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. It can mean n number of things to each one of you. For instance, I took it with the case of Amazon and Nike. You can take it in terms of moral literacy, right? कि बहुत basic चीजों के बारे में बात करते हैं. That in moral choices, moral literacy, the simplest of the rules is the golden rule. That do unto others what you want done to yourself. Everything can derive from this golden rule. So you can choose to define the topic however you want, but it is essential that you break down the idea and define the topic, because otherwise you and the examiner could be having a conversation about two different things, right? So this is very, very important in an essay to break down what your idea is and which direction you want to take it in. Then obviously you can talk about the positives, the negatives. This is a generic breakdown of the essay, that why is simplicity important, why simplicity before complexity and simplicity after complexity. You can build multiple angles and perspectives, and 3 to 5, this is obviously each para should have a perspective. Now we'll also talk about how you can ensure that there is flow in your essay and what you can do about generating ideas and all of those things. But let's just understand the basic structure. And finally, the third thing that you need to do, yes, Kush, you had a question? Breakdown of idea. Yes, obviously. So let's say, for instance, we continue with this example of simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So you explain what is simplicity, because simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So you have a couple of keywords in this sentence: simplicity, sophistication, and how those two are interrelated. So first and foremost, you need to define what you understand by simplicity. What is simplicity for you? Is simplicity in communication the best thing ever? Communication wali simplicity हमने Amazon and Nike वाले example से देखी, that very, very simple, very one line, just do it. Amazon, A to Z, right? Those are very simple. Why are they simple? No confusion. Clarity. There is. Gautam, I would request that you not put lines on the board. Right. So these are, let's say, two things that you want to break down simplicity into. What else would you want to break down simplicity into? You can also break down simplicity into, let's say, look at this slide over here. It's a very, very complex and cluttered space that I've created. This is not simple. So you can also say visual clarity. So you can break down simplicity into multiple aspects. It could be visual, it could be spatial, it could be, communication. So you can have these multiple angles that you want to tackle simplicity from. So this is the idea when you're breaking down that what are the angles that you would like to discuss. We'll talk about some of the sample ways or frameworks that you can use to find how to break down an idea. But obviously, these ideas are context specific. You would need to be clear about whether they're applicable to the essay that you want to write about. And after breaking down of that idea, you have to talk about multiple perspectives. Positives and negatives is a very simple way to go about it. Then why you prefer one to the other. This is where you're taking a stand. In an essay, you can take a stand. Let's say, for instance, we're talking about caste, right? So caste, when I'm saying that there are negatives, so I have multiple number of negatives, right? There are khap panchayats, which are horrible. There is intercaste marriages, whenever they happen, people are killed. Honor killings hoti hain. Caste limits what occupations you take. There is discrimination. There is n number of negatives that you can come up with. But what are some positives? You should also think about what are some positive ideas of caste. How is caste helping some people, right? So for instance, over here, you can talk about caste associations. That what are caste associations doing? They help the young people from their caste groups to gain skills. For instance, you can also talk about that there were a few khap panchayats where they, as a community, came together and said that we will not take dowry within our caste. So that is a positive. Why? Because when a khap panchayat says something, that is said to be a decree that will be followed within the caste, right? So there are positives to caste as well. So you do both, and then you choose one. Like, how would you like to go about this? See, the idea is that there are positives of khap, but overall the negatives are so many, and because of the cultural connection that we have, caste being something that we have had to deal with over like long periods of time, and because the context that it carries for a lot of people. that caste can have negative connotation. You can say that in an essay, provided that you have justified why you are coming to it. And finally, in your conclusion, you should have an optimistic outlook for the future. Let's say if you're talking about caste, then you can also talk about how the caste system, at least in urban settings, is no longer a very, very strong criteria. Caste does not determine what I'm going to be working as, right? Caste is not limiting me in any way, provided I am out of the context of caste. Out of context of caste means I am in the city. Why? Because in the villages, caste still exists. We may say that untouchability is outlawed by Article 17 and all of those things are happening. But when you go back into the rural India, you will find that there is still instances of untouchability that is being practiced. So what you need to have is an optimistic outlook that even this has reduced over the last 70 years, but something that is so entrenched within our society will take some time. We are moving in the right direction. And as you can see that people from all over, no matter the caste, can find a role in the upcoming economy, because the economy is caste agnostic. If you understand tech, nobody cares about what your caste is. You should be a good coder. If you understand finance, nobody cares what your caste is. You should be good at finance. So those are the kinds of things that you can talk about in a caste-based essay on, let's say, caste. Because in the end, you also need to keep in mind that once you get selected as an IAS, IPS, or any of the posts with this exam, as a senior bureaucrat, you cannot have a negative outlook, because you are the person who is in charge of guiding the lives of hundreds, maybe millions of people. So you need to have an optimistic outlook on life. So this is something that also UPSC checks for. Obviously, some can fake it very easily, but it's great if you can have a positive outlook, because that really helps. Right. So since previous session में हमने देखा था कि these were some of the keywords that were mentioned in the syllabus itself, that in the essay you must keep closely to the topic. What does that mean? That, for instance, each of the paragraphs that we are talking about, let's say 2 to 3 paragraphs for the introduction, 3 to 4 paragraphs for the positive, negative context, and the conclusion. So in each of those paragraphs, you should have at least 1 to 2 keywords connected to the topic of the essay, because in order to put those keywords in there, you will need to stick to the essay topic. And this is one of the core things that you need to keep in mind while writing an essay, that you need to stick to the topic very, very closely. If you digress, meaning if you take a turn somewhere, you spend 2 pages explaining some other idea and then you want to come back to the main idea, that will lose marks. That will cause you to lose marks. Why? Because ये चीज आपको भी ध्यान रखनी है. This is something that you need to keep in mind, that the examiner is not very interested in, you need to keep them hooked. And in order to keep them hooked, keywords are the idea that every passage should seem like it is connected to the topic. Now, the next thing that we saw in the notification, where UPSC itself had told us what is important for the essay, was arrange ideas in an orderly fashion. So your ideas should have a priority order. Let's say if you're talking about caste, right? So what is the first thing that you should mention, and what is a low importance thing? You should not be talking about maybe, the fringe benefits of caste associations to begin with. The caste associations are doing this, that. Attack the core. What is the core? Caste-based discrimination. Why? Because this is the most pertinent thing about caste. Sorry about that. Attack the core of the idea in the beginning. Your priority should be based on how important are multiple aspects of this in relation to each other, right? So let's say we're talking about caste association, then we're talking about discrimination, then we're talking about jobs in that caste limits, what kind of jobs you can take. Then we're talking about Dalit assertion. Then we can talk about the SCST Prevention of Atrocities Act. Well, these are just topics that are anywhere related to caste, right? So this is the part where, let's say, we're ideating. So I've got 5 topics. Now you need to arrange them in a priority order. You should not be, you start with caste association, then you jump to Dalit assertion, then you talk about the SCST Act, then you talk about jobs and discrimination. Start with the most important idea, have a priority order. Discrimination about caste is the most important thing. Obviously, it also depends on what the topic of the essay is, but this is what you need to do. You need to be able to assign a priority order to your ideas, because this tells the examiner that number one, you understand the core issue here, and number two, how closely is that issue related to the topic, because this is again the first thing that UPSC says that we need to be concerned about, that you should stick to the topic. So caste में in 5 चीजों में जैसे what will be most important is what keeps closest to the topic, right? And finally, effective and exact expression. No bullshitting the examiner. Don't think ki, you'll talk about random things and you'll just build arguments for 3 pages and then maybe take it somewhere. It may seem in your head that you're doing great things, that you're logically going there, but effective and exact expression means that you need to very, very closely stick to the topic and no bullshitting. Don't take the examiner to be a stupid person. If you do that, obviously you lose marks, not just for not sticking to the topic, but also testing the examiner's patience. Because this ties in with the previous idea that we talked about in the first session, that you need to make it easy for the examiner. Make it easy for them. How do you make it easy for them? You have keywords in each para. You have a priority order of your information and no bullshitting the examiner. So now we come to the tactical aspects of essay. So if you've seen mains answer writing, you have, let's say, 11 minutes for 250 words. This is the general idea, right? You have 250 marks, 180 minutes, and for 15 markers, you get 11 minutes. This is the calculation here. In essay writing, you have 90 minutes for 1000 to 1200 words. Why? Because you have 2 essays, 180 marks, 180 minutes. So each essay, you get 90 minutes for 1000 words. Like even a very simple calculation will show you the 1000 words you're writing in GS in about 44 to 45 minutes. Right? So you've got a good, of these 90 minutes, you have a good 45 minutes to plan. Obviously, since writing the essay is not something like a GS answer where you're writing really fast, so you can say that you have about 30 minutes to plan. So UPSC is giving you ample time to plan, and be careful that you spend equal time on both essays. It should not be that you're spending, let's say, 2 hours on the first essay and then rushing through the second one. Why? Because both the essays carry equal marks. Even if you write a brilliant essay for the first one and don't do a good enough job of the second essay, you will not get above average marks. Why? Because both those essays are counted. So you need to plan for both, and you should have equal time for both. And a very simple idea is that you have at least 30 minutes to plan your essay. So how do we go about planning this? How do we, make a plan? How do we go about all of these things? We'll do it in 2 steps. Step 1 would be brainstorming. Let's say, for instance, the caste example that we just took. You take a topic of the essay, and let's just take a topic from. So this is a topic from 2020 mains. Tech is a silent factor. Technology is a silent factor in international relations. So this is a topic of the essay. right? So first step that you need to do when planning your essay is brainstorm. Write down anything and everything that you think is relevant here. Don't think about how important it is for the essay or not. What are the technologies that you can think about? Let's say AI. AI is something that comes really easily to the mind, right? Next, you can think about defense. Defense tech is very, very important. What you can also think about, cybersecurity, blockchains, let's say. So the first step is just write down everything. How is that important in IR? Economic angle, right? Because if you have better defense, you can have a better export of that defense. Other than that, it's the military angle. What else? There is also the diplomatic angle, that countries which are self-sufficient in, let's say, defense exports or in cybersecurity will obviously have a diplomatic edge over other countries, right? Then how is it also important? Ideological. How ideological? Because this is where we can take the example of the Cold War, right? The Cold War mein USSR was helping countries that were ideologically similar in technology terms. Similarly, US was helping countries which were ideologically similar in with technological transfer, right? So first step to your essay is to brainstorm, that write down anything and everything that comes to your head about these things. Then the second step obviously becomes that you assign a priority order, arrange this information into a narrative. So the topic over here was tech, a silent factor in IR, right? So there are three things that are important in this simple line. There is technology and there is IR. That's very visible. But the third thing is silent factor. You must also talk about why it is a silent factor and not a loud or explicit or in your face kind of a factor. Why is technology a silent factor? You could also give points about why it's not a silent factor, not silent, but like we discussed just now, you need to keep closely to the topic, and the topic says that tech is a silent factor. So you should at least have some opinion on how it's a silent factor. So once you've brainstormed all of these things, we've brainstormed things about tech, we've brainstormed perspectives about IR. Now we also need to brainstorm a little bit about how it's a silent factor. When could it be a not silent, loud factor, right? And then you need to go about creating a story out of this. So for instance, we talked about when you're starting an essay, you need to start with a story, right? So in this essay, you can start with a Cold War story, right? Or you could talk about, let's say, you can go to ancient history. You can talk about Rome, if any of you know about history. So this is where the personal touch in the essay comes in. There is no best story to start the essay with, but you need a story. So for instance, if I'm talking about Rome, because I have read a lot about Roman history, so I know that Rome was able to dominate its neighbors and become the greatest empire in antiquity. Why? Because it had better technology. And it was aware that it had better technology, so it guarded that technology really well. So it becomes a silent factor. Why? Because the other person is not really aware about why they're losing. So with this story about Rome, what I've done is basically explain to the examiner that I've understood all three important things. I've understood how tech is necessary, how international relations are impacted, and how it's a silent factor. Right? So this is what a story is all about. Now, the second step in planning your essay becomes, of all of those things that we talked about AI, we talked about blockchain, we talked about cybersecurity. Now you need to arrange that information into a narrative. अब narrative, obviously it's something for you to decide कि आप किस तरीके से इस बारे में बात करना चाहते हैं. What is the point of view that you want to portray in this essay? Because this is an important part that you need to realize that in the essay, you have to have some opinion. आपकी opinion होगी ना कोई मतलब when talking to your friends, I'm sure all of you will have some opinions on why technology is important in international relations or why it's not important in international relations. So that very opinion, using these angles and perspectives that we have built in step 1, this is what you would need to put in a structure in step 2. राइट कि किस तरीके से आप इन चीजों को एक के बाद एक लगाओगे ताकि examiner gets the maximum impact of what you're trying to say. Now, this is obviously something that will be covered in the model essay frameworks that I'll share with you in the day today. So I'll share 2 model essays. I'll share a model essay and 2 frameworks. So you can check those frameworks into how the information has been arranged into a narrative, the brainstorming part of it, and obviously we'll also be doing an exercise to this effect at the end of this session. So now let's come to the writing part of it. Ye ab tak kya tha? We were talking about the structure of an essay. Yes, obviously, Sanika has said historical perspective, industrial revolution, formation of D10 is an example of standard practice. Great. So, right, obviously, see, I will not be able to come up with all the examples. All of you will also think about multiple other angles that were not probably, readily apparent to me. So this is what brings a personal touch to your essay. Now, this is the part we're talking about good writing. So good writing has 3 basic things for your essay. A good hook. What's a good hook? Like we talked about the example of, let's say, Game of Thrones, right? So a murder in the first scene, that's a very good hook. You're already interested. Why is this person getting murdered? Why was this, I think Bran Stark, why was he thrown out of the window? What is happening? So that's a good hook. So similarly, in your essay, starting with the story is a good hook. Starting with, interesting data is a good hook. The second thing that you need to keep in mind is the peak end rule. So ये एक psychology का फंडा होता है that human beings experience things in steps. We don't experience things a lot of the time in flow. So your essay may not be, great through and through. But if, let's say this is your essay may not be, at high levels through and through. This is, let's say, a high level essay. This is a poor essay. Your essay may be going something like that it had some good parts, then it did not have some good parts, and then it ended average. So what you need to keep in mind is that your conclusion at least should be great. How can you put a great conclusion, and why do you need to put a great conclusion? Because of the peak end rule. That human beings remember, आपका जो examiner है, your examiner will remember 2 major points in your essay. They will remember the peak of your essay, and they will remember the end or the conclusion of your essay. So you need to have a good conclusion, because that is the last point for you to leave an impression on the examiner. And if you can leave a great impression, then that means that after they have finished reading your essay, they will be inclined to give you great marks. Right. So this is a general idea that you can keep in mind in order to improve your score in the essay, that having a good conclusion is an important part of your essay. Obviously, writing a great essay overall is like nothing beats that. But even if you are not great at writing, if you feel that, you do not write the best kinds of essays, so the 2 things that you need to work on is a good hook, that is an introduction. How do you get a great introduction and a good conclusion. So these are the two things, because a good hook and a good ending will ensure that the examiner enters your essay and leaves your essay with a good feeling. Now let's talk about the third thing, logical flow. How can you build flow in your essay? Let's also get some idea about the hook. Hook ke bare mein we've also already talked about a little bit, but there's still a slide here that you need to generate interest in the reader, that we talked about earlier. You can use a story, you can use data, but it needs to be relevant to the question, and you cannot ramble. You cannot go on for 2-3 pages just in your intro. Intro should be 2 to 3 paragraphs at most. One page can have maybe 2 paragraphs, and that should be it. So 1.5 pages is where your introduction should be. It should be relevant to the question. For instance, the Rome idea over there, we talked about in tech and IR. That's a great. Why? Because it talks about all of those 3 things. So in similar manners, you need to generate the interest of the reader. Now, flow in an essay. So how do you build connection between the paragraphs? Sometimes a lot of people say this, that they're not able to connect paragraphs, their essay seems disjointed. So what you can have is a link sentence. What's a link sentence? Let's say you're ending one paragraph where you were talking about the military angle in the same same essay topic, which is tech is a silent factor in international relations. So in one paragraph, you're talking about the military angle. At the end of this paragraph, you can add a line about, but the military is also directly related to the economic. Let's look at how, right? So you built a link sentence and you've also asked a question. Then you can use the next paragraph to build the economic angle. And then the economic can be connected to, but the economic angle also leads to ideological strengthening. Based on what kind of ideas you want to talk about next, how, obviously then you'll have to justify how the economic can lead to ideological strengthening. Why did the USSR collapse? It was not the ideology, but the economic factors that led to the downfall. The USSR bankrupted itself in the arms race and all of those kinds of things. Those are also examples that you can take over here. So this is one of the ways that you can ensure that there is flow and connection between your paragraphs, because the examiner should get the feel in your essay that you're talking about the same thing from multiple angles, and you're letting the examiner know what you're going to talk about next. Why? You need to take away the element of guesswork. The examiner should not be guessing what you're going to talk about. Hence, you can use signal words. What are signal words? Whatever perspective that you want to talk about next, start maybe the paragraph with that. For instance, जो military वाला हमने paragraph अभी बात करी, so you can just start that paragraph with militarily speaking, or in military terms, having a technological advantage means superiority on land, air, and sea, right? And having superiority on land, air, and sea means that you have great advantage while negotiating. So using these signal words, you can tell the examiner what you're going to talk about, what is the area, and every time you use a new signal word, it tells the examiner that you're shifting focus. So it's taking the guesswork away from the examiner's effort. You're making it easier for the examiner to check your essay and maintain the flow in that essay. Keep the examiner engaged. Right. So again, reiterating this for the nth time, essay is not a GS answer. Don't overdo points. You can use points. It's not like you can't use points. Militarily speaking, and you can create a flow chart that, you know, these are the military importance of having higher technology. You can use points like this, but your entire essay should not be in points, because that does not give a very good impression, because there is no flow, because it all seems very disjoint, and writing, you know, an essay that is 1,000 words in a disjoint manner, it's a very, very boring and dry way to go about it. So don't make the examiner's job tedious. make it easy for them. How do you make it easy for them? Don't overdo points. You can use flowcharts, you can use diagrams, you can, integrate data, but it should not be just data. What you need to focus on is, like we've talked about before, having a narrative. And narrative के लिए आपको क्या करनी पड़ेगी? Planning. Planning, we've already talked about. There are 2 steps to planning. Step 1 is your ideation, and step 2 is organization. So now let's come to the frameworks. What kind of frameworks you can use? Obviously, I've already talked about international relations. Where there's the MEDICS framework, which is the military, economic, diplomatic, ideological, cultural, and strategic. Right? Standard, you have the PESTEL framework, which is political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal. So what are these frameworks doing? That when you remember the part we were talking about where we needed to break down the idea. So you use these frameworks to break down the idea. You can use the temporal framework, that whatever idea was being talked about, what happened in the past, what's happening now, or what may happen in the future. You may have a sectoral breakdown, that how is this related to media, science and tech, business, sports, religion, politics. You can have multiple angles of the individual and community, right? So this is a very, very simple circle of life sort of a thing. It's easy to remember all of these. I'll tell you how. Let's take this example, walks of life. So there is the individual, then there is the family that the individual is part of, then the workplace, society, community, the national, and then international. These are all just spheres that the individual is part of, and it's very easy to remember these kinds of frameworks. So problem and solution is another framework. What is the problem? How did it happen? How did the problem come up? What is happening with the problem right now? How does it benefit, for instance, the caste? This is a great framework for using the caste essay. How did caste evolve? What is happening with caste right now? What are the benefits of caste? What are the problems of caste? How can we go about creating a way forward? So these are all frameworks, and obviously this is not the limit of these frameworks. There are n number of other frameworks that you can use, that you can develop on your own. These are some of the frameworks that you can use to go about writing your essay. When nothing else makes sense, PESTEL is a great framework: political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal. You can also add multiple other angles, for instance, women's issue, then international, right? Then religious. There is no end to this. You can create as many frameworks as you want. I've given you a few sample frameworks so that you can get started with thinking about these things, right? This is the idea. And this is a major question that I get a lot of times, and then a lot of people are talking about that, should we add code? Should we add poems? Should we add this, that? Like we've discussed before, this is value addition. If your structure plus content is lacking, then value addition will not do a lot for you. But if your structure and content is great, then this value addition will fetch you those extra marks. So quotes, poems, etc. Don't start thinking about the essay with these things. Think about what you want to talk about. Think about how you're going to break down the idea. Think about what are the different angles that you think are relevant and important here. And once you have done that, then come back and think about whether you remember any quotes related to this, right? Whether you remember any poems, because like obviously you may not. So it's not absolutely necessary, because if you cover the basics, you write well, there is flow, and you have stuck to the topic, you will be fine. You really don't need quotes and poems, right? Still, I'll share a course sheet which is arranged with topics. This will not be exhaustive. This will not be exhaustive. This will be a limited 5 to 7 page sheet, which you can use as a base to keep on adding your own ideas and quotes that you think are relevant that you can use. This is again connected to building content. This is the content that you need to build for mains, because till the time you do not build your own content, if you just think that using somebody else's content is fine, it will be very difficult for you to recall that content. So I'll share a basic framework and some quotes. You can keep building on that. And now let's come to the final fun part of today's session. So you have, just a second. So a lot of messages from people who were not able to join. Let me just, okay, no, that's fine. Great. So you have 10 minutes. I'm starting a timer, and I want you to do the first part. I want you to just do the step 1. That is ideate. If this is the topic in your essay paper, and this is an actual question from mains 2017. So I want you to do step 1. I want the timer is starting now. The time is started. You've got 10 minutes. I want you to ideate, write down as many angles, as many ideas related to this topic